Most people think discipline means consequences. Timeouts, taking things away. Raising your voice until the child finally listens. And if that's what you've been doing, I want you to know something right now. You're not a bad parent. You were never taught anything different. But there is a different way. A way that actually works, not just today, but long term. And once you understand it, you will never see a child's behavior the same way again. Here's what no one tells you about misbehavior. It's never random. Every single time a child acts out, throws a tantrum, refuses to cooperate, lies, hits, shuts down, there is a message underneath. Not an excuse, a message. And that message is always about belonging and significance. That's it. Children who feel genuinely connected, genuinely capable, genuinely seen. They don't need to misbehave. Misbehavior is a child's best attempt to meet a need they don't yet have the words for. This idea comes from the work of Alfred Adler, an Austrian psychologist who was ahead of his time in ways that are still not fully appreciated. His core insight was simple but radical. Humans are social beings, and everything we do is driven by our need to belong, children included, especially children. So instead of asking, "How do I stop this behavior?" Adler would ask, "What is this child trying to tell me?" Let's sit with that for a moment. Think about a child who constantly interrupts. In the traditional view, this child is rude, impulsive, attention-seeking in the worst way. The correction is swift. You wait your turn, you don't speak over adults. There are consequences if you do. And maybe the interrupting stops for a while, but nothing underneath has changed. The child still doesn't feel heard. The need is still there, unsatisfied, waiting to resurface in a different form. Now think about the same child through Adler's lens. The interrupting isn't defiance. It's a child saying, "I'm afraid I don't matter here. I need to know I belong in this conversation, in this family, in this room." That's a completely different problem, and it calls for a completely different response. This is not about letting children do whatever they want. It's about understanding before acting. Adler identified what he called the 4 mistaken goals of misbehavior. He described them as mistaken not because the child is bad, but because the child is using a flawed strategy to meet a real need. The 4 goals are attention, power, revenge, and assumed inadequacy. When a child is seeking attention, excessive, relentless, exhausting attention, they're really saying, "I only feel like I belong when you notice me." The instinct is to either give in or pull away. But what actually helps is finding ways to give genuine attention before the child has to demand it. Brief moments of real connection, eye contact, a hand on the shoulder, sitting beside them without an agenda. You take away the hunger before it becomes a crisis. When a child is in a power struggle, arguing, refusing, pushing back against every single thing you say, they're saying, "I only feel significant when I'm in control." And here's the thing about power struggles. You can never actually win them. Even if the child complies, you've deepened the struggle underneath. What works instead is offering real choices, pulling them into decisions, letting them have agency in age-appropriate ways. You don't give up authority. You share it strategically, and in doing so, you reduce the friction. When a child is seeking revenge, saying hurtful things, deliberately doing what upsets you, seeming almost glad when you're hurt, it means something has already broken. This child feels so deeply that they don't belong, that they've stopped trying to belong and started trying to even the score. This is the hardest one and the most heartbreaking. The response isn't to match the hurt. It's to stay warm, stay consistent, and begin the slow work of rebuilding trust. These children need to discover through experience, not words, that the connection is safe again. And when a child retreats into assumed inadequacy, giving up before they start, refusing to try, saying "I can't" before the task is even explained, this child has decided that the safest way to avoid failure is to never try. They'd rather be seen as lazy than seen as incompetent. The response here is not pushing or pressuring. It's It's breaking things down so small that success is possible, celebrating genuine effort rather than outcome, and removing the emotional weight attached to performance. Stay with me here, because this is where it gets practical. One of the most powerful tools in Adler's framework is something called encouragement, and it's not what most people think it is. It's not praise. Praise is evaluative. Good job, you're so smart. I'm so proud of you. Praise, as well-intentioned as it is, makes the child dependent on external evaluation. They start performing for the approval rather than developing genuine confidence. Encouragement is different. It's process-focused. It's noticing effort, naming what you saw, trusting the child's capability. You worked really hard on that. You figured that out yourself. That was tricky, and you kept going. The shift is subtle, but the effect is profound. You're building an internal compass, not an addiction to external validation. Another cornerstone of this approach is natural and logical consequences, but understood correctly. Natural consequences are what happens when life itself responds. A child refuses to wear a jacket. They get cold. That's a natural consequence, and it teaches something no lecture can. A child rushes through homework. The work is messy and incomplete, and they deal with that at school. You don't need to add a punishment on top. Reality is already doing the teaching. Logical consequences are used when natural ones would be unsafe or too delayed to be meaningful. They're connected to the behavior, they're respectful, and they're reasonable. If a child throws a toy, the toy is put away for a while, not as punishment, but as a direct response to how the toy was used. The key difference between a consequence and a punishment is tone. A consequence is calm, matter-of-fact, and consistent. A punishment is about making the child feel bad. One teaches, the other just hurts. Something worth sitting with. We often discipline from our own emotional state rather than from a clear intention. When a child misbehaves and we're tired, stressed, already overwhelmed, the response that comes out is rarely the one we'd choose in a calm moment. Adler's framework asks us to slow down. Not because slowness is always possible in the middle of a difficult moment, but because the habit of pausing changes the pattern over time. You ask, what does this child need right now? And that question, asked genuinely, shifts everything. There's also the matter of family atmosphere, something Adler cared about deeply. Children don't just respond to individual interactions, they absorb the emotional climate of the home. A home where mistakes are treated as problems to solve, rather than character flaws to punish, creates very different children than a home where error means shame. The question isn't whether your child will make mistakes. They will, constantly, because that is how humans learn. The question is what they learn about themselves when they do. This doesn't mean perfection from parents either. That's not what this is asking for. What it's asking for is repair. When you lose your temper, and you will, because you're human, what you do afterward matters more than the moment itself. Going back to your child, saying I was too harsh earlier. I'm sorry, and showing them that relationships survive conflict and that adults can take responsibility, that is some of the most important modeling you will ever do. Children learn how to handle rupture by watching you handle it. One of the most freeing things about this approach is that it takes perfectionism off the table entirely. You're not trying to produce a perfectly behaved child. You're trying to raise someone who knows they belong, knows they're capable, and knows that mistakes are part of living. A child raised that way doesn't need external punishment to behave well. They have an internal reason too. The shift Adler is inviting us toward is from control to connection, and control works until it doesn't. Until the child is old enough that you can't control them anymore. Until the obedience trained by fear becomes the resentment of a teenager who doesn't want to be near you. Connection, on the other hand, compounds. Every moment of genuine understanding, every time you met behavior with curiosity instead of reaction, every time you offered a choice instead of a command, it builds something that lasts. Discipline without punishment is not soft. It is not permissive. It is not letting children run the house. It is harder in many ways than traditional approaches. It requires more self-awareness, more patience, more willingness to stay curious when you're exhausted. But what it builds is real, not compliance, character, not obedience, belonging, and at the end of the day, that's what every child is asking for. Not perfectly, not politely, often not in ways that are easy to hear. But underneath every difficult behavior, the message is always the same. I want to matter here. I want to belong here. Show me that I do. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear this. Don't forget to like the video, and if you want more videos like this, make sure to subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.